Good evening, everybody. What's up? Welcome back in a hotel room tonight. So we are at the mercy of hotel Wi-Fi. Literally anything could happen, but well, you guys are well used to that. Before we get into tonight's show, I need to tell you all, don't go anywhere, because at some point throughout tonight's show, I touched on it last week. I mentioned it, I hedged my bets, but I've got 2 virtual Paddock Club passes to give away for the French Grand Prix to you guys. It's going to be really simple to win them, but I'm going to tell you later on, so hang around, don't go anywhere. So we've got all that to look forward to. We have got plenty to look forward to as well, because there is so much to talk about, isn't there? Goodness me, Baku never fails to deliver. So thank you to you all for joining. Thanks for the chat that's been going on all afternoon. Some really interesting chat in the chat. I have been looking at it, I've been working today, so haven't really been able to jump in and chip in with the conversation, but great to see you guys picking it up and running with it, so thank you. Hello to you all. Yes, the hellos flying in from all over the world. It always, still to this day, blows me away how far and wide people are tuning in every Monday night to chat about Formula One. You know, it highlights to me how good a state Formula One is in, because whether or not you love the cars, whether you think they're too big or heavy, whether you think it's too predictable, whether you like the fact that some of the drivers are paying their way into the sport, whether you like some of the circuits or not, any of those things can go on the periphery, because what really matters is that Formula One gets people talking, and that's what it's so good at, getting people talking all around the world, and that's what we're going to be doing tonight, talking about it. We have got lots of this kind of chat to talk about. I knew these little tyres would come in handy when I bought them. We'll definitely be talking about these little Pirellis, particularly the hard ones that did not make it to the end of the Grand Prix on some of those cars. We can talk about flexi wings. We can obviously talk about Lewis's magic brakes, as they're termed at Mercedes, and the impact of all of that, how that went so horribly wrong, and anything else you guys want to talk about. So fire the questions in and we'll go from there. Where shall we start? Let's start with Baku as a racetrack. It's a weird one because it's kind of part street circuit, but has the longest flat out section of full throttle on the calendar. And for that, I love it, because it's so diametrically opposed, the two halves of this lap. It's even faster than Monza on one hand, and yet even slower than places in Monaco on another. And that gives the teams a real setup dilemma. And that's exactly how this weekend played out. Do you set your car up with low downforce, low drag for that long straight, which if you don't, you potentially are a sitting duck along there for the slipstream and the overtake? Or do you maximise your downforce, which gives you pace through the twistier parts of the lap, but crucially keeps your tyres alive during a race scenario? Gives you longevity with the tyres. And that was exactly where Max Verstappen, Checo Perez and Red Bull chose to park their setup this week. It was much more of a higher downforce than the setup that Mercedes and Ferrari and McLaren and others went with, because they were all looking at maximising the top speed. The way it played out though was that although Mercedes were quicker in a straight line than Red Bull were, when it came into the race, they chewed their tyres up much more quickly, and that in turn is what led on to Max Verstappen's tyres having much more life left in them at the point where Lewis felt he had to pit because degradation was kicking in on his soft tyres, and Max was able to pull off, and Checo, an effective overcut with an extra couple of laps with still enough pace because their tyres had been kept alive, and that's what helped to jump them at the pit stops, together of course with Lewis's slow pit stop, having to wait for Pierre Gasly coming in. So the setup dilemma is always one. Every year the teams wrestle with it. What suits their car? What's going to suit their qualifying performance versus race? And some teams get it right, some teams get it wrong. It's never such a straightforward scenario as just choosing one or the other. There's a compromise with each, and it's a balance between the two that ends up winning out on the right car on certain situations. Yes, we'll talk about the tyres. Of course, we're going to talk about the tyres in a moment. Good Wi-Fi so far, says Nick Philil. Is it an expensive hotel? It's not an expensive hotel, but it seems to be good Wi-Fi. Long may it last. Why did Mercedes screw Bottas in Q3? Well, Valtteri Bottas's weekend started quite badly and steadily got worse as it played out over the weekend. And of course, yeah, in qualifying, he was the fall guy in towing, being sent out first to tow round not just Lewis Hamilton, his teammate, but others too. And in doing so, he was heavily compromised when it came to getting the tow. And the tow was so powerful down that long straight in Baku, as you will have probably heard on the TV, at times worth half a second, maybe even more than that, just getting a tow. You know, even if you discount things like the DRS advantage that you get in the race, just the tow worth half a second or more. That can be a whole host of grid positions, and Valtteri just wasn't really able to capitalise on that this weekend. I don't know the reasons for it. Mercedes, I'm sure, will come out and explain their decision making in their video, as they openly do most races, and I think we all appreciate that. But yeah, his race weekend was a disaster. As it turned out, Lewis's ended up not much better in the end. So as a team, Mercedes scored a massive open goal this weekend on a number of reasons that we will get into in a moment. But Valtteri, once he qualified so badly, just then really struggled with the high tyre degradation that Mercedes had anyway, and Lewis was suffering with that too. But during the phase of the race where he's stuck behind certain cars early on, before we get to things like DRS opening up 3 laps in, he's already chewing through tyres in that train of cars where he's not able to get past until DRS opened. By that point, it was all a bit late. He'd lost so much tyre performance that his race spiralled out of control very quickly. So that was a disastrous weekend for him. Where else should we go? Whilst we're on the subject of Mercedes, shall we get straight into Lewis's magic brakes, brake magic as they call it? Brake magic, I'm sure most of you will know by now, because it's been all over the social and the internet today, people explaining what it is. I'll give it a very brief explanation for those who don't know, but brake magic is the term that Mercedes give for their setting, which is mapped in for brake bias and regen settings. What I mean by that is, when you're behind the safety car, when you are building up to a race start on the formation lap, for example, where you're not going at full race pace and you need to get temperature both into the brakes and into the tyres, ready for a race start, for example, which is exactly what happened in this case for Lewis Hamilton. You can flick a switch on the steering wheel, change the switch position. Some teams do it in different ways. Lewis has a button on the back of his steering wheel that activates this preloaded map effectively, and when he presses that button, it automatically throws the brake balance forward, a long way forward. I don't know by how much, but a long way forward, way much further forward than you would actually race with, just to put all the braking energy, or much more of the braking energy, through the front tyres, and therefore build up the temperature through those front brakes. It heats the brakes up, but in doing so it also heats through the rim and into the tyre as well. Crucial for getting a good race start early in the race. To compensate at the rear, it effectively changes the regen settings, the harvesting settings on the brake-by-wire settings at the rear, which are all linked into the harvesting. Of course, the rear braking is no longer done mechanically through the brake pedal, but done through the brake-by-wire at the rear end of the car. So in compensating for putting all the braking to the front axle, they compensate for that by using the regen to slow the car down at the rear so that it's not massively out of balance. I hope you're following that. I didn't explain that very well. The point is, it's putting all the physical braking energy, or lots of it, through the front axle to generate temperature. Commonly done, lots of teams, in fact I'm sure probably all teams do it. Certainly most teams I know do that sort of thing for those scenarios. It's a very common trick. You flick a switch to do it, and then you will have a procedure where you roll up to the start line and you deactivate that mode, which, by the way, is exactly what Lewis Hamilton did. And normally your race engineer would talk you through the things you need to do in that scenario. It'll be, excuse me, it'll be covered in the pre-race briefings. It's something that's a well-rehearsed routine. The drivers know exactly in all the procedures they have to go through when they roll up to the start line. They have a number of them. In terms of burnouts, tyre preparation, this is one of those things. They deactivate that setting. Now, if you deactivate that setting, the guys in the garage can see clearly on the data that brake magic, as they call it, has been deactivated. So no alarm bells ringing for Mercedes, the system was deactivated. But then what happened was, and when you deactivate it, of course, the brake balance goes back to its normal setting between front and rear. It's a bit more towards the front than the rear, but not that much. And then the start happens. Lewis launches off the line. You may well have seen Lewis has this funny procedure where he puts his hand over the top of the steering wheel to sort of gauge where the clutch paddle needs to sit. As he releases the first phase of the clutch paddle, he's got fingers in there just holding that in the right position, just to give him a reference as to how far he needs to dump that clutch in the first phase. It's just his technique for doing it. And what appears to have happened is, in doing that and going through the upshift as he's firing up through the gears off the line, he has reactivated the brake magic button, throws the brake balance all the way to the front. He gets to the first corner, jumps on the brakes, and there is zero rear braking. The front brakes lock, and you saw what happened. So that's effectively what happened to Lewis. Now, I can certainly quite easily see how it happened. Now, in hindsight, it's an absolute monumental cock-up, because there's no way that should be able to happen. Whether that's the switch being in a different position, whether it's a shroud over the switch, whether that particular process should be activated by some different procedure that cannot happen by mistake. There are a number of things, whether it's a light on the dash to let Lewis know that that was on there. But in this scenario, even that would have been too late. If he's firing up through the gears, reactivated by accident, as he's bowling into the first corner, there is going to be very little time for either the team to notice that or Lewis to notice that and react before he's hit the brake pedal and gone off. And I think that's the way it played out this particular weekend. So a lot for Mercedes to analyse with that, and I'm sure they will make some very instantaneous changes before we get into the next round. Let's talk about that then. What do you want to talk about that? Not a very magic button. Yes, in that scenario, it didn't do the best magic for Lewis, did it? But let me see. When Lewis realises he has a monkey on his back, hang on. When Lewis realises monkey is a case, we'll focus. That's why he's become okay. So this isn't going to. This isn't a disaster for Lewis Hamilton. We've ended up leaving the race weekend, in certainly the championship fight, in a status quo scenario. And I think from a neutral's perspective, after what happened to Max, and we'll get into that in a moment, I think a lot of people, the neutral fans, were probably relatively happy to see, you know, this end result the way it was. First of all, Checo winning, and secondly, that the championship wasn't affected in some dramatic form by a huge amount of bad luck by one party or the other. Let me see what you're saying about Lewis here. Lewis made a mistake. Well, of course it's a mistake. But the team will look at that, and Lewis and the team will look at that and say, this is a mistake that should not possibly be allowed to happen. And I'm pretty sure there's some fairly simple changes that can be made to make sure that that kind of mistake can't happen again. So of course it's a mistake, but you know, this is something they will learn from, and I'm sure will be easily preventable moving forward. Let me see. Oh, there was a good one there. What was that one? Hang on, bear with me. From a safety point of view, should they have a master button they hold in while pressing other buttons and changing settings? There simply isn't time to do that. And it's also, that would be a two-handed affair, and tearing down a circuit at 200 miles an hour, you really haven't got time to be pressing two buttons at the same time. These things are done for ease of use. That button will be in that position because that'll be a spare finger that Lewis has when he's holding onto the steering wheel rolling into the start scenario or on a safety car situation. His other fingers and thumbs may well be doing other things like operating the radio or changing other settings. So it won't just be random that button is placed at the back. It'll be there for a reason. It's just that now, given the new information they have, I'm sure they'll either move it or change the way that particular procedure is controlled, I would have thought. Do you think that F1 steering wheels, and by extension the cars, have got too complicated for their own good, considering a race was decided by an accidental switch movement? I don't actually. My feeling on this, and maybe not surprising given that I've got a technical background in this sport, I love the fact that the cars are complicated. I think they should be complicated. I think Formula One should always be at the pinnacle of technology, at the cutting edge, and it should always be pushing those boundaries. So for me, complicated in Formula One, or complex, is what they should be. And you know, if we make these things too simple, effectively what we end up with is an F2 car. Now there's nothing wrong with F2, it provides some spectacular racing, but it's not F1. And we've got F2, F1's something very different with this technical battleground as well. So that's always going to be my opinion when it comes to technology on the cars. I don't want to see it simplified, I want to see it even ramped up, so that we end up being a development platform for technologies that might even be used well beyond the realms of Formula One. That's always going to be my perspective on this, I think. Can they make it so that brake magic won't switch on when racing? Is that within the rules? Yeah, so what you can do, I mean, the point is, yes, you can do that, and I'm pretty sure that Mercedes will now put in some parameters in the software that will prevent this. The thing is, of course, you need it to be able to be activated during a race, because if there's a safety car, if there's a virtual safety car, for example, that's when you need it. You need it for keeping tyre and brake temperature up in those kind of scenarios. So it's just about rewriting the parameters of when it can kick in, when it can't kick in, and it's a very simple piece of software code that needs to be written to prevent this from happening, and I'm sure that's exactly what they'll do. Right. Who would have won if the race ended in a safety car? Checo. So this is a question, though, that needs some clarification, because there was some talk, and so let's wind it back to when Max Verstappen crashed, and we'll get into that crash and the tyre scenario in a moment, I promise. But when Max Verstappen crashed and hit the wall, there was some delay. First of all, that was quite surprising. There seemed to be some delay in even throwing the safety car, which was strange given the impact, and it was like an aeroplane crash, the amount of debris that was scattered far and wide. So it seemed almost instantaneous that we needed, at the very minimum, a safety car. That was then thrown, and then Michael Massey, the race director, has the decision to make as to whether to throw a red flag or not. Now, a very similar incident earlier in the race with Lance Stroll was dealt with under a safety car. I thought that was okay, it was fine. Didn't really see the need for a red flag in that scenario. When we get to Max Verstappen's incident, though, we are at this point, 5 laps from the end of the race. Now, if you go back to Lance Stroll's situation, I forget exactly how many laps we did under the safety car, but if we'd elected just to keep the safety car going at that point, the race would have finished under the safety car, and it would have finished in the order that they were still in. So Checo, who was leading the race at that point, would have won the Grand Prix, but the order would have been slightly changed, because I think Vettel was behind Gasly at that point, and there were a couple of other position changes. But Checo would have still won. The race would have just proceeded round under safety car, and they could have done that. If they had red flagged the race immediately as Max Verstappen hit the wall, Max Verstappen would have won that race. Because within the regulations, when a red flag is thrown, the result is taken from the end of the last complete lap before the red flag was thrown. So despite Max being in pieces down the side of the pit straight, he would have won that race if the red flag had come out immediately. Now, I'm pretty sure there is a very good case to say that Michael Massey did at least one, or I think he did 2 laps under the safety car before then electing to throw the red flag, at least partly for that very reason. Because throwing a red flag, and there was no absolute necessity for a red flag at that point, just because the damage, the debris, would have changed the result and meant Max Verstappen won, which, look, no one wants to see race directors making decisions based on who's going to win or win or lose out in a scenario, but it would have seemed very unfair in that situation to do it. I think what happened is Michael Massey threw the red flag after a couple of laps, after things had settled down, because he realised that the alternative was to have a very slow 4 or 5 lap parade under the safety car, which is not really good for Formula One. Nobody wants it, not the fans. I don't think it was the right decision. So I actually think in that scenario, Michael Massey got it right. I mean, I'd love to know what your thoughts on that are, but I think he made a very good call, a very sensible call. You heard Jonathan Wheatley coming on the radio suggesting throw a red flag because we got no warning of the tyre. That will allow people to change tyres. I've had a number of skeptics message me over the weekend saying, were Red Bull doing that to try and get a very quick red flag because they thought that might win them the race for the reasons I've just described? I don't think it was. I genuinely think that was Red Bull thinking, you know, this is a safety issue and giving Michael Massey the opportunity to let everyone change tyres under the red flag conditions. So that's my thoughts on it, and I'd love to know what you guys think. Let me see. Yeah, good decision by Massey, says Luke John Buckle. Very good evening from the Netherlands. Hello there, hello to you. Is there a simulator or training for Massey for these scenarios? He surely knew about the red flag finish. Well, I think, as I say, I think Michael Massey got it spot on at that last few laps of the race, that last incident for me. He did it exactly as I think we should. In terms of simulators and training, he's very much been training on the job for quite a number of years. Firstly, as Charlie's understudy, and now in the role himself. So, you know, the best training for this kind of thing is on the job. He's also been race director and senior officials at a number of other championships. So he's been building up, his career has been building up to this moment. I don't think we should be too hard on Michael Massey. There's plenty of occasions we've been able to criticise him fairly, I think. But I think this weekend, in the most part, he got it pretty spot on under some fairly difficult circumstances. Pull the safety car in and let them finish the race. Well, that wasn't really an option given the amount of debris that was on the circuit. That's his choice was let them finish under the safety car. He couldn't just let them carry on with all that debris on the circuit, particularly at that point, given that no one really knew whether the tyres had failed because of debris from the previous crash or anything else. It was just that would have been far too unsafe. So he had a choice of letting the safety car continue whilst the debris was cleared up, but that would have probably taken us to the end of the race, or pull him in for a red flag and a restart. I think he got it right. Let me see. There was a long delay before throwing the safety car. Yeah, I mean, as I said, there was. I don't really understand exactly what happened there. You also have to take into consideration, and I don't know if this is what happened, when we're watching these races on television, the safety car graphic is thrown up in the corner not by an automatic system that's linked into the systems on the cars. It's thrown in by a graphics operator. And, you know, there are occasions when there is a delay between the two. So if you're ever at the race circuit, you get that safety car message on the official screens before it pops up on the TV screen, because there's a graphics operator watching that official screen, and when he sees it, he presses the button. So it's not always the same delay that the teams get and everyone at the racetrack. So I don't know if that happened, but just bear that in mind. Massey went up, in my opinion, after that call, and then went back down after the McLaren call. So the McLaren call, so that was a slightly tricky one. I don't quite know the ins and outs. It was the thing with that was, if you missed it, that was McLaren getting on the radio saying, I think it was Yuki Tsunoda maybe, or Pierre Gasly, not slowing down enough under double waved yellows. Michael Massey's response saying nobody slowed down enough under double waved yellows. And I have to take again the side of Michael Massey on this, because he has the information in front of him. He says he's going to come down hard on them all at the next driver's briefing. I trust that he will do that. Drivers rarely ever slow down enough to with what the regulations state, which is you must slow down and be ready to stop under double waved yellow flags. Nobody did that this weekend, and they should all be ashamed of themselves, because that is what should happen. So with McLaren coming on and say, well, somebody else, we slowed down more than somebody else, I'm sorry, that's not a good enough excuse. We didn't slow down enough, but someone else did it worse than us is not a good enough argument to get someone else penalised. So, I'm a lifelong McLaren fan, you know that, but on this occasion, again, I fall on the side of Michael Massey. It was Yuki, thank you, yeah. Right. Would a crash driver still get a fastest lap point? Only if they were deemed as classified in the race. If they were classified in the top 10 when they crashed. So, for example, if Max Verstappen had crashed, a red flag came out, he won the race, he would still get the fastest lap point because he'd be classified as the race winner. So it's all about that final race classification. If the race classification is counted one lap back and you are classified in the top 10 with the fastest lap, you get the point. Right, shall we talk about these things then? Shall we talk about these little hard Pirelli tyres that actually weren't that hard? Where do we start? First of all, let's start with today, and Pirelli have their initial response to this, and this is before a full investigation has been carried out. Pirelli say that things look like, or at least pointing towards, it could be debris on the racetrack that caused these 2 tyre failures and some of the other damage to tyres that they have subsequently seen. I'm just waiting for the barrage of abuse to pile into the comments section there, because it seems overwhelmingly that people have immediately jumped on the Pirelli hating bandwagon. And I have to say, disappointingly, I would say, some of the commentators did it very quickly at the weekend. Some of the other drivers did it. And having been in the situation of having cars fail, have incidents happen when actually very few people really know the facts, to come out and publicly crucify a company or a supplier or a team or a driver, whatever, without knowing the full story is often, a foolish way to do things. So I'm certainly not saying this is not just an outright Pirelli failure, because lots of evidence pointed towards that. But there is still a very real possibility that debris could have caused these things, and we can't discount that. Lance Stroll, of course, being the first major incident in that chain of events, we didn't see any debris, we didn't see an incident, we didn't see anything necessarily happen that would have caused that, but that certainly doesn't mean there wasn't something there. It doesn't mean there wasn't something on the circuit. This is a street circuit, let's not forget. This is a racetrack where a couple of days ago heavy traffic was filing down these roads. People were walking down them. There's drain manhole covers. There are all sorts of things. Any one of those things could have cropped up and caused a deflation in that tyre. The next thing, of course, is that crash spreads debris far and wide up that pit straight for probably hundreds of metres. And then later in the race, Max Verstappen has a very similar incident in a very similar situation and the same point in the racetrack almost. So there is a chance that that debris from the first crash caused Max Verstappen's. Now, the flip side of that is that this is a street circuit where the 2 tyres in question had done a lot of laps, nowhere near Pirelli's recommendation. They were on 30 or 35 laps. It was the harder of the 3 compound tyres, as we know. And this is also a circuit where you get incredible maximum speeds and massive loading through those tyres because of the amount of downforce. Now, I'm not sure what kind of downforce levels Lance Stroll had. He hadn't yet reached VMAX along that straight, but Max Verstappen certainly was approaching VMAX, and he had a higher downforce setting on the car. That was a car that was probably putting those tyres under an enormous amount of load at that speed. And there's also a very real possibility that the tyre just simply gave way under those extreme loads, at the extreme speeds, the temperatures, the wear rate, although we don't think this was due to wear. And I definitely buy Pirelli's explanation that I don't think this was down to wear, but I do think, these were tyres that were very late on in their life. Wear may have played a part, or fatigue may have played a part, together with the extreme loading. But we just don't know. So it's pointless of any of us saying, I know what happened, it was obvious what happened, because there are a couple of scenarios which both have justification on this. So we do have to wait for the final results. Pirelli are doing an investigation, and I believe that the FIA are also going to do their own independent investigation in this as well. So it won't just be Pirelli deciding on what happened to their own product, which a lot of people would be upset about. So let's wait and see what happens, but there's no absolute conclusions on this. What we do know is it was catastrophic. It could have been much, much worse, but in the end, it gave us a spicy end to the Grand Prix. What are you saying? Pirelli said it was tyre damage and couldn't be... it was tyre damage and it couldn't be load as it's the least loaded tyre. Well, it's the least loaded tyre through the corners, but of course, down that straight, the 2 rear tyres are both seeing almost identical loads. So it's not that tyre was under... One tyre was under more load than the other. You see more wear on one tyre than the other. The outside right tyre, the rear right tyre, is the one that gets the hardest job over the course of a lap, of course. It's an anti-clockwise circuit, lots of start-stop. They're always rear limited at that track. So the rear right would have seen the hardest life over the course of those 30-odd laps. But at the moment the tyres failed, both the rear and the left rear tyres would have been under very, very similar load levels, just due to the speeds and the downforce being exerted down upon it. So it's not that it wasn't being loaded as much as the right-hand tyre in that moment. I don't know, but it seems too sus that they both failed towards the end of their life for it to be debris. Yeah, I mean, as I say, both arguments could feasibly play out. I mean, if there was evidence one way or the other, you wouldn't really question either, because if someone says, right, well, I found a bolt from a manhole cover that's that we think Lance Stroll hit, that's feasible, and then it could well be that they've missed some debris that Max Verstappen then picked up laps later. So both scenarios, if indeed it was one of those, is feasible, and so there's it may seem sus, and people do love to hate Pirelli, but I think too early to say. Should there be more tyre testing? Well, there should be more tyre testing, absolutely. Pirelli would definitely suggest that as well. But they do have testing. Pirelli have more testing than any of the teams have. So from that perspective, they have been pretty confident that their tyres are, as you know, they've changed the construction for this year. They've also changed the aero on the car to reduce rear loading, rear downforce, for this very reason, to protect the tyres. So they're confident the tyres, in terms of their calculations, are fine. But Baku is a fairly extreme circuit when it comes to that aero loading. So let's wait and see. What else have we got here? The risk of tyre failure is part of the fun. Well, I don't think so. I'm not buying that. I think, one thing you should be able to 100% rely on is that your tyre is not going to just fail because it's an inferior product. Apart from anything else, the teams pay a huge amount of money for these tyres to a supplier, i.e. Pirelli. They need that product to work as perfectly as it says it's going to. The same as that if you buy an engine, you don't want that to fail. You don't expect it to fail. It's not fun if your engine fails and you're buying that for an outside supplier either. So I don't buy that one, I'm afraid. The construction of the track is what made the tyres fail. Well, again, you can't say that with any confidence. It's not the construction of the track. Maybe the nature of the track puts extreme loading through the tyres, but we still don't know exactly, as I say, if that was true or not. When will the dog walks be back? Yeah, I might try and do one this week. I've got a couple of days off from filming later this week, so I might try and squeeze in another dog walking style video. I missed them greatly. I just haven't had time to do them recently. Right, tyres should be over-engineered. I think some would argue they already are. Let me see. God, these questions are flying through. I bet Michelin loved it. It also sucks for the championship fight. Well, does it? I mean, the championship fight, I think it would have really sucked if Max Verstappen had lost out on... I mean, let's be clear. Max Verstappen thoroughly deserved that win. The team thoroughly deserved the 1-2 that they were looking good for at that point, because they had simply done a better job than anyone else over the course of the weekend. They brought a great car with the right setup. They played it out pretty much perfectly and were dominating, from a strategy point of view, and the car was quick enough to dominate that race. In normal circumstances, they would have had a 1-2. So it's heartbreaking for Max, first of all, but then to see Lewis lose what would have actually been a pretty much guaranteed at least second place and retaken the lead of the championship. I think from a neutral's perspective and from the championship perspective, we leave that race, in a fair situation at the front. What Red Bull will be kicking themselves over more than anything else is that this is one of the racetracks which definitely suits their car. I mean, look, we've got a championship on our hands this season where the balance of power is going to swing between those two teams and sometimes others at different racetracks over the course of the season. We've got two cars with very different characteristics, drivers with different styles, and some race circuits, I mean, Monaco and Baku swung hugely in the favour of Red Bull and hugely out of favour from Mercedes, but other racetracks, of course, will swing way back the other way. And that's not just the tracks, it's the tyres that are sent to those tracks. Red Bull will be hating the fact that Singapore has just been cancelled, because that, you would say, would have been another one of those tracks that they would have liked. Soft tyre combinations, tight, twisty, slow speed corners, a circuit that their car would have absolutely suited, and perhaps another one where they had the potential to dominate. Mercedes will be loving the fact that that one's gone, because it's not always been their strongest, but more than that, it takes away what might have been one of Red Bull's strongest. So it's great that we've got a championship that looks like it might swing back and forward as the season goes on, but it could well be circuit specific and tyre specific as we move forward. I think that's great. Did Red Bull slow Perez pit stop purposely? Why on earth would they do that? Why on earth would they do that? I don't know why anyone would suggest that. No disrespect to you, but there's absolutely no way the team would do that. Not a chance in hell. So no, if you hadn't picked it up, no is my answer on that one. Australia isn't looking good now as well, right? No, Australia probably looks unlikely. We'll have to wait and see. There's a lot of talk over the weekend that we may well get a second race in the USA, and that race could well be Indianapolis. So that'll be interesting, particularly talking about tyres. Let's not go back there. Not that let's not go back to Indy. Loved the place, loved racing in Indianapolis, but let's not go back to the tyre scenario of 2005. Do you think Bridgestone Michelin should come back alongside Pirelli for a tyre war? Well, the thing about tyre wars is they are very expensive because you have to constantly pushing each other, and if you're not doing that, if you lock them in for the season, for example, what's the point of a tyre war? Because if you're locked in third place in a three-way tyre fight, you effectively have the worst tyre in Formula One, and yet you'll be paying a huge amount of money for the privilege. So the tyre wars, although they can continually make cars faster, it doesn't have much of a knock-on effect to, in terms of translation to tyres that we use on the road very much. There's not a major benefit to the outside world of improving this very specific rubber. So I don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately. And of course, it's expensive. Hit the like button. Do hit the like button, says Artist Ice. Thank you very much. Don't forget, before this show is over, I'm going to tell you how two of you can win exclusive virtual Paddock Club passes for the French Grand Prix. So go nowhere. That's coming up shortly. We should try different layouts at Paul Ricard, says Josh Smith. Well, yes, of course, though, Paul Ricard has been extensively remodelled ahead of this year. So we have got some tweaks to the circuit, and they are designed, of course, to aid overtaking. It's always been a circuit, Paul Ricard, that's been pretty awful when it comes to overtaking and processional races, and so they have made some pretty big changes to a number of parts of the racetrack to try and improve on that. So let's wait and see what happens when we get there. I haven't really seen or studied it personally to know exactly how much impact it's going to have, but let's wait and see. We may get something slightly better this time around. The sport needs refuelling back so the drivers can run different strategies. Now, that is a one that comes up regularly. I'm not really convinced on that. Refuelling, I don't think, brought us better Grand Prix. What it actually did was take all the overtaking off the racetrack and put it into the pit lane. With people running different strategies from, starting the race on different fuel loads, there was no point in risking an overtake on track because everyone knew what fuel load everyone else had because of their pace, and therefore they were able to just sit behind and wait for the other driver to pit and then go for it. So there are pros and cons to refueling. There's more expense involved. There's obviously some safety concerns, although that can be dealt with. I just don't think it's going to add to the spectacle. Yes, different strategies does make for more interesting races. That's proven time and time again. And if you look at, this is a clear example in Monaco, and I don't want to get into an argument about Formula E versus Formula One. The cars are very different, the racing's totally different. But one of the reasons there were so many overtakes at Monaco with the Formula E cars, and this is just one of the reasons, is that the cars run at different power levels at different times of the race. So there are cars that are fast in some phases and yet slower in others, and depending on when you use your different power levels, you get different pace. And that's similar to what you're suggesting in terms of fuel loads. Cars on different fuel loads or different strategies provide much better racing typically. What I think should perhaps be up for debate is how we introduce those different strategies. Should it be running more mandated tyres? Should it be mandating more pit stops? Are there different power levels that we should, impose on teams to be able to use instead of having the same power mode for the entire race? Could we get it, at different stages in the race? I don't know what the answer is, but those kind of devices make better racing at a point where we don't just have cars that are close enough to race each other. And that, unfortunately, has never happened on a regular basis in Formula One. So even with the changes next year, we shouldn't necessarily expect that to be the case moving forward. What's your opinion on the quali red flag problem? Formula One driving standards need to be better. Driving standards in quali this week and in Monaco were poor. These are the best drivers in the world, and they should be able to do better than that. I know that's very easy to say, sat here, not behind the wheel, but look, they are pushing too hard if they're going to be making that many mistakes, because you don't see it at other points. But on the flip side, we want them to be pushing to the limit because that's what we want to see. So street circuits, unfortunately, kind of introduce that kind of jeopardy because of their very nature, because when someone has an incident, it's generally spread across the racetrack and typically brings out a red flag. So if we're going to go to street circuits, which I think have a place, a one or two around the season, then it's just another layer that we have to put up with. And, why not? I'm all for having a Grand Prix calendar that at each event offers something completely different in terms of the race spectacle, in terms of the qualifying challenge, the setup and engineering challenge, the strategy, the tyre usage, all of these different things I think are great. So if on street circuits, it's about managing the risk of pushing too hard and having catastrophe, and occasionally that goes wrong, that's fine, I'll take that. Don't want it happening week in, week out, but that's for me the nature of a street circuit, and I think adds something to a Grand Prix calendar. Any word on what the next power units will be like? Well, very similar to the ones that we've got. I think slightly simplified, but they're certainly going to be based around what we have. So anyone looking for a two-stroke or a V10 or a V12 for the 2025 onwards, that isn't going to happen. It's going to be some kind of variation on what we have, but then using some kind of more sustainable fuel source. So I suspect that is almost certainly the way it's going to go. We'll have to wait and see. There's no absolute details yet, but that seems to be the way everyone's talking. I only got 18 minutes left already. Thanks, Josh. Right, limbo wings, what happened, says Andrew E. Well, nothing happened. It's just that there were so many other talking points that it wasn't a big talking point at the end of the race, was it? The limbo wings undoubtedly helped the likes of Max Verstappen and Checo and the two AlphaTauri guys. Those are four cars that notably have very flexible wings. But of course, there are others up and down the grid that have them all to different degrees. You may well have seen onboard shots of the Mercedes earlier on in the race where the front wing was flexing to a ridiculous amount. I don't know if anyone has spotted that. I think it was Valtteri's car. They had a nose box camera looking at the front wing flaps. And as he got onto that main straight, I mean, I would dread to think about how much it was flexing, but a huge amount on the front end. So these flexi wings on a circuit like Baku, where that long straight, and as the aero load builds up, that wing rotates backwards and dumps a huge amount of that drag, giving you or allowing you a higher top speed while still having the benefit of the higher downforce around the twisty parts, worked a treat for those guys. It was the perfect circuit for it. You need it in the slower speed stuff. You want to offload it on the high speed straight, and that's exactly what that kind of mechanism does. So that's one of the reasons that Mercedes were unhappy that these things were still being allowed for Baku, although I'm not sure it was the difference between the two teams this weekend. But it goes, of course, for next weekend. The new stricter tests come in at the French Grand Prix. There is a period of grace where you're allowed a 20% tolerance for the first, I think, couple of months maybe, as people redesign their wings at great expense, by the way, which has to come out of their allocated budget for the year. As they try to find the right balance of getting this load test right, there's a 20% tolerance for the first couple of races. But the point is, the flexi wings that Red Bull and others enjoyed in Baku will not be there for the French Grand Prix onwards. They have got to redesign it. It will have to be different. How much difference it makes, we'll have to wait and see. It's not going to be a straight comparison, of course, because it's a different type of circuit next week. I'm not sure which tyres have been taken to Paul Ricard, but I suspect it's going to be a circuit that will swing back towards Mercedes more so than the last two have, and therefore it'll be very easy to look at that and say, right, well, flexi wings have gone, Red Bull have lost their advantage. It won't be quite that straightforward. But let's keep an eye on it. The reason it didn't become a major scene was because certainly everyone had too much to talk about, and actually the idea of a protest, I'm pretty sure, disappeared quite early on when there was then threat of a counter-protest from Red Bull back towards Mercedes, if indeed they'd gone down that route, because of the clearly flexible parts on Mercedes' car as well. It would have opened a can of worms, and given that there was already something in place to bring this whole saga to an end, I think the sensible thing was to just let it play out, and then we've got a plan already to move forward. Will the cost cap stop innovations like DAS? Will it? Well, it will certainly. It will put a cap on spending, and obviously that will have an effect on certain innovations. I still think if a team manages to come up with an idea which they can then simulate and prove that it works, we'll still see innovations, but the scope for doing that is becoming less and less and less. And you've got to be now very selective. I suspect if there was a really tight year when you're tight on budget, DAS probably wouldn't have made it. I wouldn't have said that was a big enough advantage to justify the cost in a cost-capped environment of this year and beyond. So it's one of those inventions that may not have ever seen the light of day if we'd been in the current cost-cap environment. So it's a good point. Zandvoort racetrack, are you looking forward to it? Oh my goodness, I cannot wait for Zandvoort. I'm sure some of you have seen the video I did. I went there, actually it was probably a couple of years ago now, when they first announced Zandvoort. I went out there, I went around the track, I did some laps, I had a look at many of the corners, I spoke to the people that were behind bringing the Dutch Grand Prix to Zandvoort. It was a really interesting conversation. Go and check out the video. If you just put in Dutch Grand Prix into my YouTube channel, you'll find the video. So yes, I love it. It's a very narrow circuit, so it's not perfect by any means. I think overtaking could be tricky at certain points, but I think qualifying is going to be spectacular. It's got banked corners that, you know, we haven't seen for many years in Formula One. It's spectacular scenery. We hope there's going to be fans there, and what an amazing place to go and be able to watch a race. It's right on the coast, it's windy, it's dusty because the sand blows on from the beach. So yeah, I can't wait for the Dutch Grand Prix. I really hope we can do it with a packed crowd and that we get a real spectacle. So, I mean, what do you guys think from looking at it? Are you excited about it? Are you worried about the fact it's too narrow? Personally, I'm really looking forward to that one. Zandvoort's great fun in the F1 game, says Alan Stewart, absolutely. Sea of Orange, that will be, totally. Yeah, I mean, that in itself, the atmosphere with with a crowd full of orange, all right, it will be all for Max Verstappen, and if you're not a Verstappen fan, maybe you won't enjoy that, but the atmosphere that should create, I think, will be pretty spectacular as well. My favourite track on the game, yeah, there is... yay to Zandvoort. There's either going to be fans or no race at all. Yeah, I mean, the Dutch Grand Prix organisers don't really want to hold that event unless it can be packed full of fans, absolutely. Right, Daniel Ricardo, question mark. Let's talk about him. We've got 10 minutes to go. So Daniel Ricardo, I thought actually started off the weekend slightly better than normal. So as if he's made some progress with that McLaren. It's very easy to look at Daniel and say, well, hang on, Sebastian Vettel moved teams. He seems to have made progress. Checo's clearly made progress in his car. Maybe even Fernando Alonso has made some progress getting comfortable in that Alpine. Daniel Ricciardo seems to be one that's still struggling in his new car. And that may well be the case. But look, those other guys have only just clicked with their cars, if indeed they have. And I think let's not write Daniel Ricciardo off. A lot of people messaged me over the weekend saying, what a waste of money Daniel Ricciardo's been for McLaren. I don't buy that. I do think, I've talked loads of times about why it's difficult this year for drivers moving to new teams. But Daniel Ricardo is a world-class driver, and I have no doubt will find his feet. It took him a little while at Renault, but then he absolutely nailed it. I think he'll get there. So we've got to give him a bit more time, but at the moment it's disappointing when Lando is doing such a good job for the team, and the team is progressing. They're not doing, they haven't found a magic bullet at McLaren yet, but they are progressing, and Lando's getting some good results out of that car. So if they can get Daniel up alongside him, the team's looking really, really good in terms of their progression in this upward trajectory. Hang on a second. Mazepin to Mercedes. Did you see the shoulder pat that Toto gave him? Top rumour. McLaren is also too difficult to drive for an old dog. Lando figured it out because he has very little ingrained habits, says John Norris. Well, I mean, it could well be something like that, but Lando Norris has also been driving a McLaren for a couple of years now, so although this is a new car, it's definitely an evolution. In fact, it's not really a new car, is it? It's an evolution of the last car. So yeah, I mean, look, that's going to be a big question when it comes to next year, isn't it? With the 2022 cars, which are radically different. And they'll be radically different in the way they need to be driven. And then there's the question mark of, do you want a rookie coming in? Is it a good time to bring a rookie in? For example, at Alfa Romeo, in place of Kimi, for example. Is it a good time to switch your drivers up? Is it a good time to put a George Russell into a Mercedes, for example, when it's a bit of a resetting of the playing field, and you maybe don't want to have too many habits formed from driving the old version of a team's car. And if you come in fresh, maybe you just learn the new cars as they develop, as they come out the molds and start to develop over the early part of the season. Maybe that's a better way to grow your driver as the car grows, as it inevitably will over 2022, as they start to learn more and more about them. So that's going to be quite an interesting dynamic, I reckon. Alex, I'm late to the party. Sorry, don't worry, Alex. Thanks for joining. And you've got it just in time, because in a couple of minutes, I'm going to tell you how you could win 2 passes to the virtual paddock club for the French Grand Prix. How was Schumacher released with a wheel nut not screwed in all the way? Great job catching it at least before the line. Well, it's a very good question, and a question that I think the Haas team actually need to quite seriously answer. It's not the first time that's happened to them. In fact, it's not even the second time it's happened to them. Yes, great that they managed to stop him leaving the pit lane and getting out into the circuit, but you should never have a car leaving the pit stop area in anger with a wheel not tight. I don't know the details of it yet, I'm afraid. But it's clearly some kind of cock up. Whether it's a technical failure or just a human error, I don't know the answer, but it's happening too often at that particular team. How did you do on SeedStream this week? Terribly. I'd love to know if anybody got more than one random prediction right on the SeedStream predictor game that we're all on here. I got 1 point, I think I got for Charles Leclerc. But if anyone predicted that top 5 this week, my goodness, you deserve to just win the game and the rest of us pack up and go home, because that would have been an incredible achievement. It was a weird one, wasn't it, in terms of results? So I did really badly, but I suspect most people did. Let me know if you did better than one result out of the top 5. Could be an Indy 500 incident with a tyre getting hit. Well, we covered the tyres. Could we see a split championship this year? A split championship, do you mean one driver winning from one team and the team from another team winning? That could well happen, if that's what you mean, absolutely. I think the best thing about the championships this year is that we don't know which way it's going to go. And we can't really say that for the last 7 years. We've known that Mercedes were going to win, and then it was a case of which driver it was going to be. And from pretty early in the season, we almost certainly knew which driver it was going to be. So how good is it now that we don't even know which team's going to win, let alone which driver? Red Bull now, certainly off the basis of the Baku weekend, Checo has found something. Whether it was specific to that circuit, whether that's just something that's clicked in his own confidence, or whether something that he's found from a technical perspective that's allowed him to gel with that car. But if they can get both drivers up towards the front like they had this weekend, and how much help did that give them, having a two driver buffer back to the first Mercedes, if that can play out over the season and it's Valtteri Bottas that ends up letting Mercedes down, that could literally swing the championship. Certainly the team's championship, but also the drivers' championship. Valtteri needs to step up. Mercedes know that. I saw somebody ask earlier on, could they switch him in for George Russell halfway through this season if the championship looks like it might be affected? Well, yes, they could. There's nothing stopping them doing it. I don't think they would do that, but yes, it could happen. But I suspect if Valtteri doesn't buck his ideas up, this will be a very clear sign to Mercedes that this is where the partnership maybe draws to a close, because whilst it was very easy, whilst they had no outside competition from outside their own team, and Valtteri was quite happy coming in second, this year things are different. That could well be the case in future championships, and they can't afford to lose out because the second driver is not in the mix. So that's going to be very, very interesting. Let's wrap this up. With 5 minutes to go, I'm going to tell you how you can win these paddock passes. I told you last week that I had been to the virtual paddock club for Monaco and how cool it was. It's basically their take on the real paddock club, but doing it in the virtual world whilst there's no actual paddock club happening. And the idea is you turn up, you get a special unique login for the event, which will be sent to you if you win. You then tune in or you log in a couple of hours before the race, so it's part of the build-up. You then get special interviews that are exclusive to you guys who are in this virtual paddock club, with guests that are coming in and out throughout the show, guests from teams. We had Pat Simmons, we had George Russell, we had a number of other people. You can ask them questions. There is a limited number of people in this chat room. It's not like this is open to the entire world. You can ask questions live. They will then answer your questions. You get the virtual stat man coming in, giving a run through. Again, you can ask him questions. That's Sean Kelly. I really enjoyed it. It's a really cool thing to have access to, and will just make the build up to the French Grand Prix a little bit different to you, and hopefully just make you feel like you're actually part of it and something that's quite exclusive. So I've got 2 of these passes to give away, and really easily, all I want you to do is to share this video. You can do it right now, you can do it tomorrow, you can do it at any point up until the week of the French Grand Prix. And during that week, let's say we'll do it on the Thursday, so before the cars start running on the Friday, I will then pick a winner, 2 winners, from people who have left a comment underneath the video and shared the video on any platform you like. Social media, so it can be Facebook, it can be Twitter, it can be Instagram. Tag me in it, maybe leave a nice, so when you leave a comment under this video, leave something nice about how much you're looking forward to the Paddock Club or you're looking forward to the French Grand Prix. Tell me that you've shared it, tell me where you've shared it, and that's it. That's all you got to do. Share it. So we're telling someone else about this video and essentially spreading the word that you can win these tickets. And then I'll just pick 2 winners at random and let you know who has won in the week before the French Grand Prix. It's well worth entering. It will cost you nothing. It'll only take you a moment. And also we might help to spread the word about these Monday night live shows in doing so too. So thank you to the Virtual Paddock Club organisers for giving me these passes to give away. I'll give another shout out to them later on, but that's all you got to go and do for now. Share the video, leave a comment underneath this video and tell me where you've shared it, on what platform and how. Thank you very, very much. That's all you got to do this week. I want to finish this video by saying big sort of RIP shout out to Mansour OJ. You will have seen the obituaries over the weekend. Mansour was a special person for me because he was part of the McLaren family, and he was a partner with Ron Dennis, a key figure in the whole McLaren history. He was a very quiet man in terms of he shied away from the limelight, but a very key man in building McLaren into the organisation that it is today. And I'd go as far as to say that Ron couldn't have done it without Mansour. Mansour couldn't have done it without Ron. He was that important to the process, not just in terms of funding and bringing investment to the thing in the beginning, which he did, but also in terms of how he helped to lead the team. His leadership skills were absolutely key to the strategic direction that McLaren has gone in over the years, and all of that boils down to how successful the organisation has been, both on the racetrack and in the wider world that McLaren now operates. And above all of that, He was just a brilliantly lovely man that had time for everybody, and he will be sorely missed. So thoughts going out to everybody at McLaren and of course at Mansour's friends and family. On that note, we're going to leave it. I hope you really enjoyed the Baku, the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. As I said at the beginning, it never fails to deliver something, and it came late in the race this particular weekend, but it really did shake it up. And as I said, we'll get one more little view of these fancy tyres in. There's still a lot of questions to be asked about these things, questions that I hope we'll get answers to before the French Grand Prix in a couple of weeks. Have a brilliant one, guys. Don't forget to share the video and leave a comment with a chance to win those virtual Paddock Club passes for the French Grand Prix. And I'll see you really soon. See you later, guys. Ta-da!